Modern society tells us that fulfillment is the absence of suffering. But what if it is suffering that leads to fulfillment? What if we shifted our perspective to see suffering as an opportunity to restore our brokenness and shed light on our true callings in life? In this episode of the Passion with Purpose show, we're going to explore the intersection of passion, purpose, and suffering so we can live a life of purpose with a passion that never burns out, no matter the trials we encounter in life. This way, we could truly build fulfilling lives. Welcome back to another episode of the Passion with Purpose show, a video podcast to empower you to elevate your life and leadership by building a life of purpose with a passion that is fireproof. I'm your host, Steven Mezzacapa, and it is an honor to have you with me. If you're new, welcome. Go ahead right now and hit subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or hit follow if you're listening on your preferred podcast platform. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to share a quick plug to get several chapters from my book, Passion with Purpose to Fire Within, for free right now. You could go to passionwithpurpose.org/fulfillment to download over 7 chapters from my book. And actually, the topic of this week's episode is explored even deeper. So if you enjoyed this video, I highly encourage you to go check out some chapters from my book for free. Anyway, let's dive into this episode. If I'm being honest and transparent, I've procrastinated the development of this video. Shortly after publishing my book, I did an interview with my publisher, and I asked what the most difficult chapter was to write in my book. And I said it was a chapter about struggling and addressing the question of why we struggle. Even though several years have passed, this topic is still sensitive to me because many people struggle, and I would never want to downplay someone's struggles. I've been there. Earlier in my 20s, I struggled with severe anxiety and depression. And let me tell you, whenever someone said to get over it, it didn't help very much at all. It did the opposite. So let me get one thing straight. It is not my intention at all to downplay suffering or the complexities of suffering. It's my goal in this video to inspire some sparks within you to persist during seasons of suffering and keep moving forward by shifting from a perspective of despair to a perspective of hope. I feel strongly about this approach to discussing suffering because when I look back and reflect on my darkest days, if I could have one thing, it would be someone willing to walk with me through the suffering and not tell me to get over it, but who instead told me to keep pushing forward, to not quit. Thankfully, I had a few precious souls in my life at the time who stepped into this place for me. But I want you to know that if you're in a season of trial and suffering and alone, God is there and ready to step into that place with you to guide you, encourage you, and empower you. In the meantime, here are several sparks of hope for when you encounter suffering in life. Suffering comes in many forms. It's part of the hero's journey. It's part of the human condition. And I always tell others that if the Son of God had to suffer, should we expect to not suffer in our own lives? I bring this up because the first step in persisting through suffering is recognizing that it is okay to suffer. It does not make your life any less valuable than another's. Suffering well is a virtue. If we make life all about us and approach suffering from a selfish perspective, it will almost be impossible to find joy and peace in times of suffering. But if we shift our perspective and perceive life as what it can become and how we can impact others, it offers glimmers of hope. Take the case of Viktor Frankl, for example, an Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who went on to publish the world-renowned book, Man's Search for Meaning. Visiting Associate Professor of Ethics and Organizational Behavior, Dr. Ben Devon out of Palm Beach Atlantic University, who I've actually had the pleasure of having as an instructor while in graduate school, he did a good job summarizing Frankl's discoveries of what Holocaust survivors had in common. Devon notes that survivors had a plan for their lives after the war, they had hope, they saw the beauty and appreciation in small things, and they had an unwavering faith that their suffering had a divine purpose. When it comes to suffering, it could be the consequences due to the actions of our own accord or due to the evil actions of others, in which we have no control. As you may have heard before, we may not be able to control what happens to us in our lives, but we do have control on how we respond. In fact, it is our duty to take ownership and accountability in how we respond. Our response to adversity and suffering begins within our soul, within our thoughts, emotions, and choices, within our passion. Passion itself comes from the Latin word passio, which means suffering. Therefore, let us approach passion with passion. Let us fight the fire that burns with the fire that purifies and cleanses. And when I say this, I mean a few things. While physical suffering is obvious to others, internal suffering is not. And it is within our inner life where much of life suffering takes place. Suffering occurs within our thought life, our emotional life, and our volitional life. It occurs within our soul, within our passion. So when we experience pain in our thoughts and emotions, we must combat this suffering with willful adaptations in mindset and attitude to battle through this suffering. Thus, a key first step in persisting through adversity and suffering is by shifting our mindset and perspective. Here are several mindsets to encourage and empower you when confronting trial and suffering in life. First, recognize that suffering is a season. As summarized by Devon, Frankel observed that Holocaust survivors had a plan for after the war. This indicates that amidst the evil around them, they knew that this too shall pass. They held on to the hope that their suffering would not be forever. Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes tells us, "For everything there is a season, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance." When we are encountering dark suffering, it can and will feel like it will last forever. But we must meet this temptation with hope, passion, and an unwavering persistence that this too shall pass. And even in the darkest of days, this suffering will reveal its purposes. Speaking of purpose, the late Chadwick Boseman said in the commencement speech, "Sometimes you need to feel the pain and sting of defeat to activate the real passion and purpose that God predestined inside of you." This mindset that everything has purpose is powerful, but an even more powerful mindset and attitude is that God has a unique purpose for your life. Your life has purpose, and even further, your suffering has purpose. When I look back at the trials I've had to endure in my own life, I'm overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude. Not because those seasons are over, but because of who I have become in the process of getting purified through the suffering. Since walking through various trials, I've found myself able to empathize with others in ways I never thought possible. My love for people has grown, and God has continued to use suffering to guide me on life's journey, to call attention to important matters, and to live out my purpose. C.S. Lewis says, "We can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." No doubt, pain as God's megaphone is a terrible instrument. It may lead to final and unrepented rebellion. However, it gives the only opportunity the bad man can have for amendment. It removes the veil. It plants a flag of truth within the fortress of the rebel soul. Don't miss out on this opportunity to grow closer to God through pain and suffering. It's an opportunity to experience unique fellowship with God and uncover truths that we may not otherwise uncover without suffering. Let your suffering be a path to become who you were destined to be, your most authentic and genuine self. I talk a lot about this topic with my wife, actually, about this idea that we are our most authentic and fearless selves when you're young. We ponder this question that in order to fulfill our unique callings, we must unbecome who we've become as we have moved through life. So the question for reflection that I pose before you is, what if suffering is a gift from God to guide us in unbecoming and healing our brokenness so we are prepared to step into a purposeful life with a passion that is fireproof? Wherever this video meets you, know that you are never alone in your suffering. Even if there is no person present with you to walk alongside you, God is with you. Do not quit, persist, have hope in the purpose of your suffering, and take advantage of your season of suffering to grow even deeper in your relationship with God. To close out this video, I'd like to leave you with Mary Stevenson's version of the poem Footprints in the Sand. One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each scene, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there are two sets of footprints, other times there are one set of footprints. This bothered me because I noticed that during the low periods of my life, when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could see only one set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, "You promised me, Lord, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always." But I've noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there have only been one set of footprints in the sand. Why, when I needed you most, you have not been there for me?" The Lord replied, "The times when you have seen only one set of footprints is when I carried you."